Audience discretion is advised due to potentially distressing and sensitive material.
Hi everyone. Welcome back to Crime Alley Documentaries. Remember that this is the second part to Jeffrey Dahmer's case. So please go back and listen to the first part. Also, please don't forget to like and subscribe and help us continue to do what we love. Thank you and stay safe out there.
I desensitized myself to it. I had these obsessive desires and thoughts wanting to control them, to, I don't know how to put it, possess them permanently.
And that's why you killed them?
Right. Not because I was angry with them, not because I hated them, but because I wanted to keep them with me. And as my obsession grew, I was saving body parts such as skulls and skeletons. It's a process. It doesn't happen overnight. When you depersonalize another person and view them as just an object for pleasure instead of a living, breathing human being, it seems to make it easier to do things you shouldn't do.
You do sound, though, like the kind of person who could have said to himself, "This is wrong, I must stop."
I always knew that it was wrong, but after the first killing was not planned. I was coming back from the shopping mall back in '78. I had fantasies about picking up a hitchhiker and taking him back to the house and having complete control and dominance over him.
Outside a bookstore on the corner of North 27th Street, Dahmer ran into Ernest Miller, a 22-year-old native of Chicago, less than 3 months after killing Edward Smith. In exchange for $50, Miller consented to go with Dahmer to his apartment and let him listen to his stomach and heart. Miller responded, "That'll cost you extra," when Dahmer tried to have oral sex with him. Dahmer then gave Miller a drink that was laced with 2 sleeping pills. Dahmer was only able to give his victim 2 sleeping pills on this particular occasion. He used the same knife he used to dissect his victims' bodies to slit Miller's carotid artery, killing him. Miller died from bleeding out in minutes. Before putting the naked body in his bathtub to be dismembered, Dahmer posed it for a number of provocative Polaroid pictures. While he was dismembering the rest of the body, Dahmer talked and kissed the severed head several times. Miller's liver, biceps, heart, and some leg flesh were wrapped in plastic bags by Dahmer and kept in the freezer for later consumption. He rinsed the flesh off the skeleton, which he planned to keep, by boiling the remaining flesh and organs into a jelly-like substance with Soilax. Dahmer dried the bones on a cloth for a week after soaking them in a mild bleach solution for 24 hours in order to preserve the skeleton. Before the severed head was fleshed out, painted, and enameled, it was first kept in the refrigerator. On September 24, 3 weeks after killing Miller, Dahmer went into the Grand Avenue Mall and met David Thomas, a 22-year-old father of 2. Offering more money if he would pose for pictures, he talked him into going back to his apartment for a few drinks. Following his arrest, Dahmer gave a statement to the police in which he claimed that despite not being attracted to Thomas, he was scared to let him wake up for fear that he would become irate due to the drugs he had given him. That's why he strangled him and dismembered the body, purposefully leaving no body parts behind. He took pictures of the dismemberment procedure and saved them, which helped with Thomas's identification afterwards. After killing Thomas, Dahmer went nearly 5 months without killing anyone, though he made at least 5 fruitless attempts to entice men to his apartment between October 1990 and February 1991. Throughout 1990, he frequently complained to his probation officer about his feelings of depression and anxiety. He also frequently brought up issues related to his sexuality, his solitary lifestyle, his financial struggles, and, just before Thanksgiving, his anxiety about seeing and meeting his father and younger brother. Dahmer also mentioned having suicidal thoughts multiple times. Dahmer saw Curtis Strotter, then 17 years old, waiting at a bus stop close to Marquette University in February 1991. Dahmer claimed that he paid Strotter to pose for nude pictures and even offered him sex as a bonus, all in an attempt to entice him into his apartment. After giving Strotter a drug, Dahmer bound his hands behind his back and used a leather strap to strangle him to death. He then severed Strotter's body, keeping his hands, genitalia, and skull intact, taking pictures at every turn. On April 7, less than 2 months later, Dahmer came across a 19-year-old named Errol Lindsay who was on his way to get a key cut. After luring Lindsay to his flat, Dahmer drugged him and used a baster to drill a hole in his skull, allowing him to inject hydrochloric acid. After this experiment, which Dahmer had planned in the hopes of permanently causing an unresisting, submissive state in Lindsay, he reportedly woke up and said, "I have a headache." "What time is it exactly?" Dahmer drugged Lindsay once more in retaliation and then strangled him. He severed Lindsay's head and kept his skull. He then proceeded to flay Lindsay's body, hoping to preserve the skin permanently by soaking it in a solution of salt and cold water for a few weeks. When he realized Lindsay's skin had grown too brittle and frayed, he reluctantly disposed of it. By 1991, the manager of the Oxford Apartments, Soper Prince Will, had received numerous complaints from other tenants about the unpleasant odors coming from apartment 213 as well as the sounds of falling objects and the sporadic chainsaw. Prince Will got in touch with Dahmer multiple times in response to these complaints, but at first he dismissed the smells coming from his apartment as the result of his freezer breaking and the food getting spoiled. Afterwards, he told Prince Will that some of his tropical fish had recently died, which was the cause of the smell coming back, and he would take care of it. Dahmer met 31-year-old Tony Hughes, an aspiring model, at a nightclub on May 24, 1991. He was offered money to pose for pictures, which is how Dahmer got him to come to his apartment. Dahmer gave Hughes a drug to make him unconscious before injecting hydrochloric acid into his skull to break his will and make him obedient, but this time the injection and drilling proved fatal. Dahmer met Conorak Sinthasomphon, a 14-year-old Lao teenager, on Wisconsin Avenue in the afternoon of May 26, 1991. Dahmer was unaware that Sinthasomphon was the boy he had molested in 1988's younger brother. Sinthasomphon accepted Dahmer's financial offer to go to his apartment with him so they could take Polaroid photos. Dahmer claims that after initially objecting to the proposal, Sinthasomphon changed his mind and went to his apartment with him. There, he posed for 2 photos in his underwear before Dahmer gave him a drug that knocked him out and had oral sex with him. Dahmer led Sinthasomphon into his bedroom, where Tony Hughes's body, who he had killed 3 days earlier, lay on the floor, naked, before the boy passed out. Dahmer claimed to have believed that Sinthasomphon saw this body, but he was probably still under the influence of the sleeping pills because he did not react when he saw the bloated corpse. This time, Dahmer created a solitary, tiny puncture in Sinthasompfon's skull crown, using which he administered a hydrochloric acid injection to the frontal lobe. After that, Dahmer drank a few beers while lying next to Sinthasomphon. After dozing off for a little while, he left his apartment to go to a bar and buy more alcohol. When Dahmer arrived back at his apartment early on May 27, he found Sinthasomphon talking in Lao while sitting naked on the corner of 25th and State, surrounded by 3 agitated young women. Approaching the women, Dahmer referred to Sinthasomphon as John Hong, and tried to take him by the arm to his apartment. Dahmer was dissuaded by the 3 women by telling him they had called 911. When 2 Milwaukee police officers, John Balserzak and Joseph Gabrish, arrived, Dahmer's behavior softened. He explained to the officers that Sinthasomphon was his 19-year-old boyfriend, that he had overindulged in alcohol after a fight, and that he often acted like this when drunk. Dahmer said that his partner had had Jack Daniel that night. Enraged, one of the 3 women tried to explain to one of the officers, who, by now, had seen no more than a cut on Sinthasompfon's knee and assumed he was drunk, that Sinthasomphon had blood on his testicles, was gushing blood from his rectum, and had apparently resisted Dahmer's attempts to walk him to his apartment before they arrived. The officer told her to "butt out, shut the hell up, and to not meddle." 3 firefighters from the Milwaukee Fire Department arrived on the scene not long after the Milwaukee police officers. These people also checked Cynthia Somphen for wounds and gave the police officers a yellow blanket to cover Cynthia Somphen. 3 of them thought Cynthia Somphen needed medical attention, but the police told the firefighters to get out. Officer Richard Porubkin showed up on the scene shortly after that. He, along with Gabrish and Belcerzak, escorted Dahmer and Cynthia Somphen to his apartment, where Dahmer made several remarks about the overall level of crime in the area and expressed gratitude towards the police. Dahmer showed the officers the 2 semi-naked Polaroid photos he had taken of Cynthia Somphen the night before, trying to prove to them that he and Cynthia Somphen were in a romantic relationship. Gabrish subsequently reported that he detected an odd smell inside the apartment that was reminiscent of excrement, despite Belcerzak's claim that he smelled nothing strange. This smell came from Hughes's decaying corpse. According to Dahmer, one officer peeked his head around the bedroom, but really didn't take a good look into the smell. After that, the officers departed, telling Dahmer to take good care of Cynthia Somphen. The officers classified this incident as a domestic dispute. After the 3 officers left his apartment, Dahmer gave Cynthia Somphen another injection of hydrochloric acid. The results of this second injection were fatal. Dahmer took a day off work the next day, May 28, to dedicate himself to dismembering Cynthia Somphen and Hughes' bodies. He kept the skulls of both victims. It served as a means for me to recall their beauty and appearance. I also wanted to keep their skeletons, if not the whole thing if I couldn't keep them there with me. Dahmer expressed later in an interview referring to taking pictures and keeping his victims' skulls. After traveling to Chicago on June 30, Dahmer met Matt Turner, 20-year-old, at a bus stop. Turner agreed to go to Milwaukee for a formal photo shoot, which Dahmer had offered. Turner was drugged, strangled, and dismembered at the apartment by Dahmer, who then froze his head and internal organs in separate plastic bags. Turner was not listed as missing. On July 5, 5 days later, Dahmer enticed 23-year-old Jeremiah Weinberger to his apartment with the promise of spending the weekend with him after they met at a bar in Chicago. Weinberger was put under the influence of drugs and twice had boiling water injected into his skull, causing a coma from which he died 2 days later. Oliver Lacey, 24, was confronted by Dahmer on July 15 at the intersection of 27th and Kilbourne. Lacey fell for Dahmer's ruse of going nude for pictures and followed him to his apartment, where they had some hesitant sex before Dahmer gave Lacey a drug. This time, Dahmer wanted to extend his time with Lacey while he was still living. He had called his employer to ask for a day off after trying in vain to knock Lacey out with chloroform, but the following day he was suspended. Dahmer had sex with Lacey's corpse after strangling and mutilating him. He put Lacey's skeleton in the freezer and his head in the fridge. On July 19, 4 days later, Dahmer got the news that he was fired. After learning of this, Dahmer enticed Joseph Bradehoft, a 25-year-old, to his apartment. After being strangled, Bradehoft spent 2 days lying on Dahmer's bed with a sheet over him. When Dahmer took off the sheet on July 21, he discovered the head was covered in maggots. He cleaned the head, chopped off the head, and put it in the fridge. Afterwards, he acidified Bradehoft's chest and the bodies of 2 other victims who had died in the preceding month. On July 22, 1991, Dahmer made 3 men an offer of $100 to come to his apartment so they could drink beer, take pictures of themselves in the nude, and just be with him. Tracy Edwards, the 32-year-old one of the 3, consented to go with him to his apartment. Edwards discovered several boxes of hydrochloric acid on the floor of Dahmer's apartment, which he claimed to use for cleaning bricks, along with a bad smell. Following a brief exchange of words, Dahmer asked Edwards to turn his head so he could see his tropical fish. When Edwards obliged, Dahmer put a handcuff on Edwards' wrist. Edwards inquired, "What's going on?" After attempting in vain to cuff his wrists together, Dahmer instructed Edwards to go with him to the bedroom so they could take naked photos. Edwards entered the bedroom and saw that The Exorcist 3 was playing on a videotape and that there were posters of naked men on the wall. In the corner, he also noticed a blue 57-gallon drum that was emitting a foul smell. Then, Dahmer pointed a knife at Edwards and said he was going to take pictures of him in his underwear. Edwards unbuttoned his shirt and offered Dahmer permission to do so if he took off the handcuffs and put the knife away in an effort to placate him. Dahmer just turned to face the television in response to this promise. Edwards then watched Dahmer chanting and rocking back and forth. With the knife pressed against his intended victim, he put his head on Edwards' chest, listened to his heartbeat, and told Edwards he was going to eat his heart. Edwards repeatedly stated that he was Dahmer's friend and that he would not flee in an effort to stop Dahmer from attacking him. Edwards made up his mind that the next chance he got, he would either run through the unlocked front door or jump out of a window. Edwards then said he had to go to the bathroom, so he asked if they could have a beer in the air-conditioned living room. Edwards came out of the bathroom, and Dahmer nodded and they strolled to the living room. Edwards remained in the living room until he saw Dahmer lose his train of thought, and then he asked to use the restroom once more. After noticing that Dahmer was not holding the handcuffs when Edwards got up from the couch, he punched Dahmer in the face to throw him off balance and fled out the front door. On July 22, around 11:30 p.m. Edwards stopped Robert Ralph and Rolf Mueller, two Milwaukee police officers, at the intersection of North 25th Street. Edwards told the officers that a freak had put the handcuffs on him and asked if they could be taken off after the officers noticed he had one on his wrist. Edwards consented to accompany the officers to the apartment where he had spent the previous 5 hours before escaping when the handcuff keys did not fit the brand of handcuffs. Upon the arrival of the officers and Edwards at apartment 213, Dahmer extended an invitation to enter the premises and admitted to having handcuffed Edwards, albeit without providing a rationale. Edwards then revealed to the police that Dahmer had also threatened him with a big knife, and that this had all taken place in the bedroom. Dahmer told one of the officers, Mueller, that the key to the handcuffs was in his bedside dresser, but he offered no response to this revelation. When Dahmer tried to go past Mueller into the bedroom to get the key on his own, Ralph, the other officer there, told him to back off. Mueller noticed a big knife under the bed in the bedroom. Upon closer inspection, he discovered an open drawer full of numerous Polaroid images, many of which showed dismembered human bodies. Mueller observed that the interior design suggested they had been taken in the same apartment. "These are for real," Mueller said as he entered the living room to show his partner. Dahmer resisted arrest by fighting with the police when he realized Mueller was holding several of his Polaroids. He was easily overpowered by the officers, who then cuffed his hands behind his back and called for backup in another squad car. Mueller now opened the refrigerator to find a black man's freshly cut head sitting on the bottom shelf. "For what I did, I should be dead," Dahmer muttered as he lay pinned to the ground beneath Ralph, turning to face the officers. The Milwaukee Police's Criminal Investigation Bureau carried out a more thorough search of the apartment and found 4 severed heads in Dahmer's kitchen. 7 skulls in total, 2 painted and 1 bleached, were discovered in Dahmer's bedroom and a closet. Investigators found 2 human hearts and a section of arm muscle wrapped in plastic bags on the shelves, as well as collected blood drippings on a tray at the bottom of Dahmer's refrigerator. Investigators found a whole torso in Dahmer's freezer along with a bag containing human flesh and organs adhered to the ice at the bottom. Investigators also found 2 complete skeletons, 2 severed hands, 2 preserved penises, a mummified scalp, and 3 more mutilated torsos dissolving in an acid solution in a 57-gallon drum in another location in apartment 213. 74 Polaroid photos showing Dahmer's victims' mutilations were discovered. It was more like dismantling someone's museum than an actual crime scene, the chief medical examiner later said in reference to the recovery of body parts and artifacts at 924 North 25th Street. Detective Patrick Kennedy questioned Dahmer about the murders he had committed and the evidence discovered at his apartment starting in the wee hours of July 23, 1991. Kennedy and Detective Dennis Murphy interviewed Dahmer multiple times over the course of the next 2 weeks, clocking in at over 60 hours in total. Dahmer said he wanted to confess all because he had created this horror and it only makes sense I do everything to put an end to it, waiving his right to counsel during his interrogations. He quickly acknowledged that he had killed 16 young men in Wisconsin since 1987, and that he had also killed 1 victim in Ohio in 1978, Stephen Hicks. Although some of Dahmer's victims died after receiving an injection of boiling water or acid into their brains, the majority of his victims had already been rendered unconscious before being killed. He was not sure if his second victim, Stephen Twomey, was unconscious when he was beaten to death because he had no memory of the incident, but he did admit that it was possible that, while in a drunken stupor, he had seen Twomey's exposed chest and had attempted in vain to rip Twomey's heart from his chest. Following his move into the Oxford apartments, Dahmer carried out a ritualistic killing spree in which he would pose his victims' bodies in provocative ways before dismembering them, usually with the chest thrust outward. As he dismembered his victims' bodies in his bathtub, Dahmer freely acknowledged to having engaged in necrophilia with several of their bodies, including engaging in sexual acts with their viscera. Dahmer chopped off any organs he did not want to keep and pared the flesh from the body after removing his victims' internal organs and hanging the torso so the blood drained into his bathtub. He did this after observing that a large portion of the blood collected inside his victims' chests after they died. The bones he wanted to get rid of were ground up or acidified, and the skeletons and skulls he wanted to save were preserved with solutions of Soilax and bleach. Raymond Smith, Ernest Miller, and Oliver Lacey were the three victims that Dahmer killed at the Oxford apartments. He admitted to eating their hearts, livers, biceps, and parts of their thighs, but he kept the flesh and organs of the other victims for his own consumption. Usually, Dahmer would soften the parts of the body he planned to eat before cooking meals seasoned with different sauces. Speaking about his motivations for eating his victims, Dahmer said that he had first done so out of curiosity, and then continued, saying, "I suppose, in an odd way, it made me feel they were even more a permanent part of me." Dahmer claimed he had been completely swept along by his killing compulsion, explaining the rise in his killing rate in the 2 months before his arrest. "It was an incessant and never-ending desire to be with someone at whatever cost," he continued. "Someone very attractive, very attractive. I couldn't stop thinking about it all day." When questioned about why he had kept 2 victims' entire skeletons and 7 skulls altogether, Dahmer said he was building a personal altar out of the skulls of his victims, which he planned to put on the black table in his living room, where he had also taken pictures of many of his victims' bodies. The full skeletons of Miller and Lacey were to be placed at each side of this skull display. The skull of at least one future victim and the 4 severed heads that were discovered in his kitchen were to have all of their flesh removed and used in this altar. Dahmer planned to place incense sticks at both ends of the black table and place a large blue lamp with extending blue globe lights above it. Dahmer intended to sit in a black leather chair in front of the window that the entire construction was to be placed in front of, and it would be covered with an opaque black shower curtain. In an interview on November 18, 1991, Dahmer said, "Myself. It was a place where I could feel at home," in response to the question of who the altar was dedicated to. He went on to say that his intended altar would have been a place for meditation, where he felt he could derive a sense of power, and that's what they would have discovered, if this, his arrest, had happened 6 months later. Dahmer pleaded guilty but insane to 15 counts of murder and later was also convicted in the cases of the 2 victims he'd murdered in other states. There were 2 main arguments at his trial which lasted 2 weeks. Some, meaning the defense, stated that Dahmer suffered from either a mental or personality disorder and called different expert witnesses to the stand basically saying that he suffered from a range of disorders e.g. necrophilia, borderline personality disorder, schizotypal personality disorder, alcohol dependence, and psychotic disorders, which meant that he was insane and not in control of his actions. The prosecution, however, called expert witnesses to the stand that asserted that Dahmer was without mental diseases or defect and described him as calculating, cunning, unable to differentiate between right and wrong, with the ability to control his actions and his lust overpowering his morals. In their statements, they added that there was ample evidence that Dahmer prepared in advance for each of his crimes and none of his crimes were impulsive, that they were all premeditated. Adding that he kept the victims' bodies to give himself prolonged sexual pleasure. It was also stated at the trial that his motivation for murder was his pent-up aggression within himself. He killed those men because he wanted to kill the source of his homosexual attraction to them. In killing them, he killed what he hated in himself, and that he was longing for companionship and that caused him to kill. In reality, many described him as amiable, pleasant to be with, courteous, with a sense of humor, conventionally handsome, and charming in manner. He was, and still is, a bright young man. But the defense all along emphasized that his was the result of a sickness he discovered, not chose, and that he was so desperately lonely and so profoundly sick that he was out of control. It was also stated in court that he strongly identified with the villains of movies Exorcist 3 and Return of the Jedi and was obsessed with the level of power these characters held. He sometimes watched specific scenes from these movies before going out on a haunt for a victim. Dahmer was ruled to be sane and sentenced to life imprisonment plus 10 years, and this was only because Wisconsin had abolished capital punishment. After his sentencing, his father and stepmother, Sherry, requested 10 minutes alone with him, which was granted, at which time the three exchanged hugs and well wishes before Dahmer was escorted to Columbia Correctional Institution. For the first year of his imprisonment, Dahmer was placed in solitary confinement cause of concerns for his safety. But at his request, he was transferred to a less secure part of the correctional institution and was assigned a 2-hour daily work detail cleaning the toilets. Later, the work detail came to also include cleaning the prison gymnasium. During his incarceration, he received countless correspondence from people around the world, and many donated money which he spent on cassette recordings, stationery, cigarettes and magazines. It was in July 1994, when an inmate, Osvaldo Durruti, tried to take Dahmer's life by slashing his throat with a razor he had hidden in a toothbrush while Dahmer sat in a prison chapel as he was gradually devoting himself to Christianity. The wounds were, however, superficial and he wasn't hurt seriously. Another incident took place in November 1994 when Dahmer left his prison cell to do his assigned work detail along with 2 other fellow inmates, Jesse Anderson and Christopher Scarver. The 3 were left unsupervised in the showers of the gym for about 20 minutes, and at approximately 8:10, Dahmer was found on the floor of the bathrooms. He was severely bludgeoned in the head and face with a 20-inch metal bar. His head was also repeatedly bashed into the wall during the attack. He was still alive and was rushed to the hospital where he was pronounced dead 1 hour later. Anderson was also murdered in the same manner and died from his wounds 2 days later. Reportedly, Scarver, the 3rd inmate, returned to his cell after the attack and told a prison guard, "God told me to do it." Jesse Anderson and Jeffrey Dahmer are dead. He claimed that he hadn't planned on killing the 2 men but was rebutted since he had concealed the weapon prior to the attack. He also stated that Dahmer never screamed while being attacked by him. It was like he had accepted his fate. Dahmer's mother, Joyce, who was not in contact with her son for many years, had just started to build a relationship with Dahmer and reported that Dahmer had told her during a phone conversation that, "It doesn't matter, Mom, I don't care if something happens to me." Joyce, in response to her son's death, told the media, "Now is everybody happy? Now that he's been bludgeoned to death, is that good enough for everyone?" A victim's mother remarked, "The hurt is worse now, because he's not suffering like we are." Scarver was sentenced to 2 additional terms of life imprisonment for the 2 murders. The aftermath of all that had happened was that the Oxford apartments where Dahmer had killed 12 of his victims were demolished and is still a vacant lot. Dahmer's possessions were destroyed and buried in an undisclosed landfill in Illinois. Lionel, Dahmer's father, published a book entitled A Father's Story and donated a portion of the proceeds from his book to the victims' families. Both Dahmer's parents died of natural causes and his younger brother, David, changed his surname and lives in anonymity.